Finally, Clemson Sports Talk has come back to Drive Time. Hello, everybody. Lawton Swan back in the saddle once again. It is the show that shakes the Southland. Clemson Sports Talk for you each and every afternoon as you make your way around the great state of South Carolina and beyond, listening to us on incredible radio stations like Fox Sports Radio 1400 in the Midlands, heard around the world on the iHeart radio application. Download today. It is free. The website, put the .com on it, doggone it. That's ClemsonSportsTalk.com. On a Friday afternoon, Tommy Bowden joins us in hour number 2 of the show. Of course, if you're watching live right now on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, the full show will kick off at 4 o'clock on the iHeartRadio app. If you're not in the Midlands, if you are in the Midlands, listen on 1400 AM. Be a part of what we do every day on our website. Again, ClemsonSportsTalk.com. Speaking of the website, Luke Winstall joins us. He's over in Warner Robins, Georgia tonight for a big-time high school football matchup. We'll get his thoughts on what he saw last weekend in Death Valley and what he expects from the Tigers this weekend against Florida Atlantic. Also, Luke's a student over in Athens, Georgia. The Gamecocks come marching in to the Classic City for a 3:30 kickoff. I can't remember the last time South Carolina's played on CBS at 3:30. So congrats, Gamecock Nation. Appreciate you guys being a part of the show today as well. You're probably saying, Swanee, was that a subtle jab? Yes, that's because I love you. That's because we're friends. All right, Luke's joining us here on the program, and he is on location again in Warner Robins, Georgia. Luke, what's up, big guy? How are you?
Doing great, Lawton. Thanks for having me on. How are you?
Man, I'm good. Okay, so let's start with the Tigers. Obviously, this past Saturday, there were some early woes. Dabo Swinney seems to feel like those are just things that Clemson is going to be able to shake off moving forward. Another game where they should have an opportunity to put up a pretty big number, you would believe, against Florida Atlantic. But you were down on the field taking some photos. Give me your thoughts on what you saw last weekend from Clemson and where are your concerns?
Last week, I'll say, when you're looking through the camera, especially some of those plays early, you notice it, but you're so focused on shooting. There was one moment I turned around and looked at the scoreboard, and I said, wait a minute. I said, wait, this is actually really close. This, 21-17 about to be halftime, because I'd been focused on, trying to shoot big plays and turn around and see what the recruits were doing and what were their reactions and see if I could shoot some of that. So really what I was saying and looking at is, wow, this is not clean at all from Clemson. Same thing that the fans were seeing. And I think Coach Dabo Swinney, put it the best way post-game when he said, like Taj Boyd back in that 2011 era when he thought Chad Morris was going to eat his headset when Taj would make some mistakes in those games. So it's that growing process. And I think Clemson fans have been lucky, transitioning to a new quarterback, for example, with Trevor Lawrence. He was pretty seamless the way he came in as a freshman, obviously. So seeing some of those things and seeing even the first taste of DJU, the Notre Dame game, those first tastes were really good. And this is maybe the first time in a minute that we've had the small sample size of Cade Klubnik, and there's ups, but the downs. And that's why when I wrote that piece, the day after piece, it was the quarterback roller coaster continues. This time it started as, okay, this shouldn't be too hard of an opponent for Klubnik. Let's see what he can do. And then, oh gosh, that looks really bad. There's, 3 or 4 big mistakes. But then back in the third quarter, he showed us his ability to rebound, his ability to come back and trust some of his receivers, and Clemson finding completed passes to 16 receivers was a good sign. So the roller coaster continues, but was really encouraged by some of the backups that we saw as well, and the running back depth and Jay Haynes, and maybe he's the RB3 and the safety option there offensively that makes you feel a little more comfortable if one of the top 2 were to go down. So those were some main takeaways. The defensive line is, seems to be as deep as it has been in a minute. And with Tamarion TJ Parker, I thought that maybe he'd make a push to be a starter. It sounds like that's not going to happen, but to have a starter level player as a freshman able to come in behind and play 20 to 30 snaps per game, which I think is where he'll be this week again. Those are the kinds of things that, I find very encouraging.
Yeah, follow him on Twitter at Luke Winstall, covers recruiting for us on the website. And again, he's over in Georgia. We'll talk with him in a minute about the matchup that he's set to see this evening. Now, when I think about, some of the comments that Dabo Swinney has made, Luke, he continues to talk about how, and he said this for a while, right? That there's no preseason game, and you don't have, as far as I know, a whole lot of choice in when you play a certain team or a certain game. I definitely feel like, though, and I know what we saw at Duke. I know how that game unfolded, but I do buy into this because I don't know how much you would play your starting quarterback in a preseason game. If I'm being honest, what I see in the NFL, you don't see the starters a whole lot. Like they get a quarter, maybe. But I do think if you flip these games, right, and you had played Charleston Southern week 1, and you'd had those early struggles, to me, it does feel like, and maybe I'm wrong, but it does feel like that Clemson probably doesn't have the same issues that they had in Durham because you're a little more settled, you're a little more comfortable, you've played, you've gotten some live reps. I mean, I don't know if there's really anything to what he says, but in my mind, if I could flip flop the schedule, I don't know that Duke game ends up the way that it did, just because I think there was a lot going on. That's a Duke team that's better than people expected. I think Clemson played tight in game 1. I think Cade Klubnik played tight. I mean, what do you think? If you had it the other way, do you think the end result's still the same?
I think it's different. At least the score line of the game is different. Maybe Duke wins, but it's not a blowout seeming type of win. And the thing I look at is just this is what comes with being a big program, a nationally prominent program. Of you get asked to play in a kickoff game, you go play in Charlotte. You're playing an opponent that they wanted to put on TV, so it wasn't going to be a Florida Atlantic in week 1 in one of those kickoff games. So when you accept that, when you're asked to be a part of it, it's an honor as a program, but also comes with the responsibility and the risk of, hey, there's a chance it might not go well. And Duke was firing on all cylinders at the right time. And I think that it would have been different if you flip it and maybe you play Florida Atlantic and Charleston Southern both before, because you have some teams that even begin with a couple of cupcakes to begin the season, like, the way that, for example, Georgia's schedule shook out so far. So those kinds of things of if you'd had those two really easy games to start out, maybe you play Duke week 2 or week 3, and then you're ready. And then some of the things with Klubnik, they seem very fixable, and the coaches have definitely let us know that they believe they're very fixable issues. So if they are fixable, and they're quickly fixable, which we'll find out this week and next week how quickly they were to be fixed with Klubnik, the turnovers, the pocket presence, to be specific about some of those things. Maybe the pocket presence is better. Maybe he doesn't throw a pick six like we saw last week when I saw you, hold up your phone of what the field looked like of the receivers on that play. And maybe there's more composure in some of those early decisions if you had those games where against Charleston Southern, you can storm back in the third quarter, take a huge lead, and then go play a couple of different guys in the fourth. So I think it would shake out differently, but that's the responsibility that you take on when you're a program like Clemson and you have an honor like that to play in a nationally televised kickoff game again.
Yeah, you go back a couple of years ago, they opened with Georgia and Charlotte. Then they were open with Georgia Tech a year ago in Atlanta, then at Duke. Next year in Atlanta against Georgia. I mean, that's kind of become the norm right out of the gates for the Clemson Tigers. All right, you brought it up, the Georgia Bulldogs. Let's talk about their matchup. They haven't played a whole lot, not a lot of meat on the schedule thus far. This is the first, SEC opponent they'll face. South Carolina has struggled on the ground. I think they've got like 53 yards rushing this season. Give me some insight into the mindset right now over in Athens as South Carolina comes in, which should be a much better opponent than the first two teams the Dogs faced off with.
Yeah, just from talking to some friends that cover Georgia and press conferences throughout the week, there was a funny moment about Kirby Smart being asked about a South Carolina player that didn't mention Georgia as one of the top home environments he played in. So Tonka Hemingway didn't mention that. So some people took that personally. I think some of it was taken out of context on each side, but it was asked in a press conference, and that was one of the more notable quotes. In Georgia, their press conferences are not quite as quotable as what we get in Clemson. So it's some of my friends over there have taught me to really appreciate what we have with Dabo Swinney and his ability, speaking as freely as he will sometimes. So, for example, like on Tiger Calls with the transfer portal, that was insightful. The room right now at quarterback, there's confidence that Carson Beck can be good, but he hasn't shown that he's elite yet. There's some concern there. It's not, Alabama level quarterback concern by any means, but it's the okay, this guy's good, but he's had a couple of slow starts, and there's a few balls that look a little off, and there's still conversation about quarterback and just how settled that may be. But defensively, lots of guys so far seem to be, in midseason form. The group very deep, linebacker, secondary, the defensive line, some young guys have rotated in and been able to fill the role just like they have had young guys rotate in the past couple of years. So defense is not a big concern. It's just offensively snapping some of the pieces in, getting some of the receivers back from injury, and then seeing what that complete offense can look like. Now that they've had a couple of games under their belt, some cupcake types of performances to get things going. Now they get a bigger test. They have eased into it, and for Georgia, that this game is not a huge concern right now, just in terms of the vibe of winning and losing, but a lot of excitement to start SEC play.
Luke Winstall again on the scene in Warner Robins, Georgia. We'll talk with him about the matchup that he's going to be at this evening, featuring a couple of Clemson guys facing off. We'll talk more about that in a minute, and we'll find out about his visit to see Champ Thompson last weekend. Luke's covers the state of Georgia better than anybody. I can guarantee you that. All right, here we go, Luke. We got a question from Spencer. He chimes in. He says, Klubnik's footwork and pocket presence needs work. It's his fourth start, though. And I guess that's not technically a question, but I'll ask you, how much do you forgive some of these issues maybe that Cade Klubnik's had just simply because he is young? You kind of alluded to it earlier, but, give me your thoughts on it. You see a lot of young quarterbacks in this day and age. I think the expectation was that Cade was going to be a little more polished for fans than he is right now. What are your thoughts?
I think we're seeing a little bit of why he didn't play last year. He's good. He's got the raw talent, but he's not the polished to the point where he was the immediate plug and play. He's going to fix the problems offensively. And we're seeing that, but now that it's his offense and those things that he has to make these adjustments on the fly, learning, being thrown into the fire this year a little bit as, everything falls on him. When the offense is rolling, it's, yeah, okay, that's good. When it's not, it's, oh, what's up with Cade? What's this? So looking at that, I think it's important because the first start came back in January, so it seems like it's been a while since he'd been a starter in the North Carolina game, and it'd been a minute. So when you look at that, it's important to remember, like, oh yeah, it's only the fourth start, but also the thing of he is a 5-star. There's high expectations. So it's fair to be critical. It's fair to balance, but it's also fair to say that it seems like he left a good taste in everybody's mouth, or most people's mouth, that left on Saturday after Charleston Southern of, okay, he did find his rhythm. Okay, he was able to create explosive plays, like plays that we didn't see a whole lot of last year. Bill Collins and Josh Sapp, and some of those plays that were 20-plus yards downfield for a touchdown. And when you look at that and say, okay, there were some positives to take away. So instead of the Duke game that leaves a bad taste in your mouth, you get, okay, this ended out okay. He made some adjustments. There were some things that it seemed like when Sadler was in at left tackle, the offense was a notch better. So that's one thing that I look at. For a young quarterback, you need the supporting cast. I would love to see the tight ends a little more involved in the big games. Like we saw Sapp and Branningstool a little bit, but I'd love to see them be more of a safety blanket for Klubnik. I think Sadler at left tackle is probably where I would lean if anyone asked me going forward. So putting those pieces around him to make him a little more comfortable as we head into Florida Atlantic and then a bigger game coming next week with Florida State. Those things I think are small details that also you need those things to be going to get a guy, fourth, fifth or so start going. You need to have some of those extra pieces, and I think those are also settling into place for Clemson.
On Twitter, he's at Luke Winstall. Again, the article on the website right now for our premium subscribers, 3 and out, looking into 4-star Champ Thompson and 2 Clemson commits matching up tonight. David Iziamume and Ricardo Jones going to be facing off. Let's start with Champ Thompson. You saw him last weekend. Give us your takeaways from one of Clemson's big-time prospects down the road.
No doubt. Champ Thompson has always been an interesting one to me because he's not someone that I would classify as an attention seeker. I wouldn't say even close to it because he's not out there posting on social media. He's not doing a whole lot of media in general. I know like Tyrese has had good ties with him, so we've always had stuff on Champ on our site. But in general, he's not going out and doing a ton of interviews, media tours, and posting and getting on these big pages. So he's a little more mysterious, which was part of my motivation for going, to figure out, who is this guy? Who's his family? Because obviously his dad played for the Falcons, Michael Thompson. So people in our area are aware of some of those things, but just figuring out, his mom's got ties to Deshaun Watson. She went to Gainesville, and I think one of her nephews had coached Deshaun in some assistant role at Gainesville. So there were a few interesting things that I wanted to dig into, talking to the family, talking to Champ. And really what I took away was he's a top 300 guy. He doesn't get a whole lot of hype for being this, Aaron Donald type of, hey, he's going to be the next Aaron Donald. Doesn't get a lot of that, but he does do what you would expect him to do. So run stopping, being versatile. He can move all over the line. Really good run stopper. So those were two things I was expecting that we immediately checked those boxes. Then his footwork and his explosiveness in the pass rush, I wasn't sure what it would look like in person. It was better than I thought. He's able to, had a quarterback hurry, had a couple of plays where he was pushing his man or he was pushing through a double team, and it allowed a teammate to come in and make a sack or make a play. They had, I want to say, 6 sacks and 7 tackles for loss in that game Friday night, and he was drawing so much attention. He's very often double teamed, which I understand can be frustrating because he's not coming away with huge stats in these games, but his teammates in the defensive line was really feasting, and they held their opponent to 29 rush yards. He was a big part of that. So, and it was a top 10 team in the 5A class that they played. So I came away impressed. I came away, interested to hear about the youth team he played on, and having played with multiple 5-stars in one game, and some of the talent that he's come up with and always been around, and the connections that he's had. And he considers Jamal Anderson, Clemson freshman linebacker, to be a cousin because both their dads played for the Falcons at the same time.
Okay.
They grew up together, and the whole, early 2000s Dirty Bird Falcons era, like their families are very entrenched in that, and they grew up that way. And that's one of the things when Champ visits on Saturday, one of the first questions I got from Champ's dad, Mr. Thompson, he's like, hey, how'd Jamal look last week? And he's asking me, what do you think about him? Is he going to play, or how many snaps is he getting? And we had a good conversation because they're just so tied together, and they didn't both choose Clemson to be with each other. It was separate recruitments that just happened to go the same way. And I think Clemson will be very proud of the effort that they put in to land those two guys. Both definitely will, rotate in the next couple of years and be pieces that you all get to know soon.
So final question for you. I know you're over there to see 2024 commits Ricardo Jones, a safety, and then David Iziamume, running back, facing off. We got about a minute and a half. Tell me what you're looking to see tonight and where you are and what teams are matching up.
Yeah, for sure. Down here in Warner Robins, so Ricardo Jones, 4-star Clemson commit safety, plays for Northside, which is down here. They're going to host North Cobb, traveling down from the Ackworth north side of Atlanta. It's a matchup that we don't see often, Atlanta versus a Central Georgia team, and the travel involved of, close to 3 hours for North Cobb. So I'm looking forward to it. Really, the main draw for me was they play on opposite sides of the ball. David is a big play running back, and Ricardo is a big hitting safety. He's a guy that's a ball hawk and well-rounded, and I haven't gotten to see Ricardo in person yet. I've seen David a few times. So it was one that I said, okay, 2 commits in one night. Maybe there's a collision. Maybe there's a play where they meet and earn respect for each other. Maybe Ricardo by collision, I mean, maybe Ricardo makes a good tackle. Maybe David makes a good cut, and it's just going to be fun to watch and to see how they interact with each other, see how close they are. What's the interaction pregame, postgame like? I'm sure we'll, be in for some interesting quotes postgame as well.
Awesome, man. Well, I'm looking forward to the coverage on the website again at ClemsonSportsTalk.com. He'll also have coverage on his Twitter account at Luke Winstall, and you can find his work as well on our Twitter account at Clemson Sports. Luke, buddy, man, always appreciate you.
Thank you for having me on. Have a good one.
There he is, Luke Winstall, out of the gates. Tommy Bowden coming up in hour 2. We'll hit a break. We'll come back with more right here on Fox Sports Radio 1400 The Midlands, and, of course, right around the world on the iHeart Radio app.